Hello, and welcome to Learning Curve, Navigating Education Access in a Pandemic. I am COLLEEN McCain-Nelson, National Opinion Editor for McClatchy. This school year is beginning with more questions than answers. Working families are struggling to help their kids learn online. Parents are weighing the risks of sending their children into the classroom and the emotional effects of keeping them home. And districts are trying to bridge the digital divide that could leave some students behind. How should our schools, educators, and parents tackle these issues? Today, we've gathered leaders, educators, mental health experts, and parents to help find answers to these questions. We hope these conversations bring you insight and value. In addition to this discussion today, we will also hold a national conversation on Thursday, September the 3rd, that will focus on the challenges of educating during a pandemic. I hope you'll join us then as well. So let's begin. I'd like to introduce Lexington Herald leader, opinion columnist Linda Blackford, who will lead today's conversation.
Hi, thanks so much, and thank you to everyone for joining us. My name is Linda Blackford, and I am an opinion columnist, but before that, I spent the past 20 years covering K-12 and higher education, so these are subjects very dear to my heart. COVID-19 has disrupted every sector of our society, but perhaps nowhere more than education systems. From kindergarten to graduate school, we're seeing incredible changes in how students learn and achieve at every level. Everyone's worried about how we keep our kids safe, healthy in body and mind, and on the academic tracks they need to achieve. So first up to discuss these issues is a man who campaigned largely on his support for public education, Governor Andy Beshear. Welcome, Governor.
Thank you for having me, Linda.
So, Governor, as a father yourself and the person largely directing Kentucky's COVID-19 response, what do you say to parents who are worried that their children's education will be irrevocably harmed by the disruptions of COVID-19?
Well, the first thing I tell them is, I'm with you. I'm the dad of a sixth grader, so a middle schooler, and a fifth grader, an elementary school student. And I, like every parent, am worried about them falling behind. I'm also learning that I'm not a very good teacher at home, and I know we're all going through those difficulties. What I can say is a couple of things. First, our educators have been phenomenal. Just watching my kids start their distance learning this year, there's a night and day difference, and you can tell that our educators have worked so hard through last spring and through the summer to make it the best experience possible. And while we all want our kids in class, me included, knowing that it is a superior experience, just watching my kids' faces light up, seeing them engaged, we do need to thank our educators for the great job that they've done. But let's also not admit defeat. I don't believe that any of the falling behind that we've seen is irrevocable, and I'm unwilling to believe that for my own children or for others. If we work hard, we get this virus under control, we get back into the classroom, we ought to be looking for different ways to make up time, to know that this is a challenging pandemic that's impacting us in a lot of ways, and we got to be ready to do everything we can to catch those kids up. You know, it's a tough time. The life and health of our people are on the line, and you're right, it's impacted everything. We've got to make sure we're committed over time to making it up to our kids.
Well, thank you. One of the things that's been exposed during COVID-19 is the huge inequities in our society across everything, but particularly in schools. What can you as governor do to address some of the problems we've seen between the haves and have-nots in our educational systems?
Well, it's certainly true that COVID-19 has laid bare inequalities, injustices. The problems of our society are all magnified during this pandemic, and those that were suffering suffer more. And we got to remember that before this, we were focused very much on just getting a child in class. Doesn't mean that they can learn if they're hungry or if they're sick. It's about making sure that basic needs are met. So on the education side, we know that one key is access to broadband and internet. Especially right now when we have to engage in distance learning, everybody needs to be able to connect, not just for their education, but for their future. We have to have a state where everybody can get online, not just to learn when they have to, but to make sure that they can engage in what the 21st century economy truly is. So we're working right now on getting all of our cell phone carriers signed up for a program where we can pay a certain amount to create hotspots on those phones to where those children that currently can't connect or their families can't afford for them to connect, but have that cell phone, can still get online. We believe that this can solve 99% of all the connectivity problems. But there are other areas that I talked about that we truly have to address for children. We have fewer children than we did 2 years ago and 3 years ago signed up for healthcare. And those are children disproportionately in populations and areas that are being hit really hard by COVID-19. We see our African-American population dying at twice the rate they make up of the population. And while our Hispanic population isn't suffering that death toll, they're almost 15% of all cases, being nowhere near that in the population. So while I believe healthcare is a human right and I want to sign everyone up for some form of healthcare coverage, we've begun a campaign to help those that are being hit most during COVID-19, to get them into the system. I can tell you, Linda, that when we look at other states that have a per capita death toll much higher than us, most of them didn't expand Medicaid. Most of them didn't do what it took to get everybody in this system and to be healthy. And COVID-19 is showing us that if we don't address all of those basic needs, again, those who've been marginalized are only harmed more. We got to come out of this as a better people, as a better society, and by better serving our children.
It's interesting. Now, I want to talk about the past couple of weeks, because it seemed like from the coverage that it's been sports that has really come to the forefront, and it pushed you to the edge when you said you would not rule against the KHSAA starting competition in September, but it was up to all of us to make sure sports didn't cause cases to spike. Could you walk us through how you came to that conclusion and how you think it's going to play out?
Well, especially with our education sector, it has been up to local superintendents going all the way back to March. Now, I've made recommendations, I've provided my opinions, and I did that on sports as well. With where the virus is right now, especially when I made the recommendation to push in-person classes back to September 28th, we were at 6% at one point, had been over 5%. In part of that period, we're seeing a dangerous escalation. While we have stopped that escalation, we need time to get our positivity rate down, and it's going down. So I have confidence that by September 28th, we can be in a place, if we all wear masks, if we don't let up, if we social distance, to get our kids back to in-person learning. So when I made that recommendation, most superintendents chose to follow it. I also gave my advice on sports. And listen, I love sports. My children play sports. But what I talked about is there's a big difference between high contact and low contact sports and their ability to spread this virus. And I was worried about the spread of the virus and the student athletes, but I was also worried about the possibility for success. If you start a high contact sport right now, how many weeks are you going to get through before the season's canceled? If you're willing to consider doing it later, are you going to get more games in? But what we did see is we saw certainly an outpouring of parents that want the high contact sports right now, and the group that governs it made a different decision than some logic that I'd laid out in front of them. At the end of the day, I can't be the person that just says no all the time. If we're going to defeat the virus, it takes all of those in positions of authority to make good decisions. Now, where this is gone, it's going to mean that every superintendent, principal, every coach, every referee is going to have an obligation to make sure the programs are running right. Kids should be getting tested if they're in high contact sports, that people are spread out, if there are fans at all, that everyone is wearing a mask and that everything is done right. And any student athlete that's had COVID, we need to be very careful about checking their heart and ensuring that we're watching out for myocarditis. So a lot of work ahead, but to do it well and to do it right, it's going to have to take some real responsibility from folks out there. But my goal is always to be transparent. I certainly have concerns, and I think people know that. I think other people have concerns too. It's just there's a large group of folks that want to give it a try. I certainly hope that it can be successful, and we'll do everything that we can to try to provide the best guidance to make a high contact sport right now as safe as it can be for that student athlete.
Clearly, when you look around social media in Kentucky, there are a lot of people who just do not think COVID is a big deal, or they either think it's a hoax or they think it's not a big deal. And next weekend is Labor Day coming up, and so I wonder what you would say you think is going to happen after Labor Day, and we won't hold you to it. But when do you think it's possible that students could come back? I mean, do you, like a lot of people say, well, I don't think we'll be in this semester. We'll have to wait till next semester. Could you, I mean, realistically, what can we hope for?
So let me start with social media. It's broken. and it's not a true reality if you look at the comments on it. Now, being somebody that ran for office and then served, I've even seen over the past 6 months that the minority of folks that don't believe this thing is real shout at everybody else that tries to post anything positive until they just say, I'm done with it. I didn't want to put something up positive just to see all of this nastiness. And it's some of the same groups over and over and over. And people have stopped. The vast majority of people that agree that we ought to take the right steps, that we shouldn't experiment with our kids, that we should learn from other states before we go back to in-person classes, have just been pushed out. And it's no longer a real reality, what you see online. And it's some of the worst of our humanity, a lot of what you see. I get that there's anxiety. I get that there's fear, but you don't talk to and treat people the way that so many people are doing online right now. And some of those that are doing it profess their faith like I do. Well, my faith teaches me that you never treat anybody the way that a whole lot of people are being treated online. And folks, if there's moments where it all builds up, just breathe. Don't let it make you do things that you will later regret. And certainly if you do them online, and I try to tell this to my kids, they last forever. Now, as to in-person learning, I do believe right now, if we continue our trajectory while we've had more cases, we have a declining positivity rate. We are continuing to see a lot of testing, which is good, that we can be back in-person learning in some form, maybe a hybrid form. On September 28th, that those plans that our superintendents worked hard on, they'll get a chance to put into action. It'll be really important that anybody who started early at a time when it's going to be that much harder, not mess it up for the rest of everybody, and to do their very best to keep cases low, but most important, to be transparent and to respond appropriately. It's not just going to be a test about when we get back in class. There are going to be positive cases. And are we going to do the right thing when there are the positive cases? Or are we going to fight with local health departments and try to get out of doing what our obligation truly is?
Okay. Now, on a more positive note, have you seen any silver linings to this crisis for our kids? Are there any things that have been positive in this whole situation?
Oh, we've seen so much positive out of our children. I believe our children are often the very best of us. And whether it's the children's willingness to wear a mask, if you just tell them it's going to help protect somebody else, maybe their grandparents, maybe anybody else, they get it. They want to do the right thing. We teach them the difference between right and wrong, and we don't try to politicize it. We see the chalk art that they put out there, both enjoying it, but also wanting other people to see it and to get joy out of it. While distance learning is difficult, we are going to probably have the most computer literate generation going through our classrooms right now that we have ever had. And my children will never complain about going to school ever again. Once we get through this, we get back to full-time, always in-person classes. I think our kids, especially some of our older kids, are going to realize just how lucky they are. And I think we've all realized that. I mean, I haven't had an opportunity to interact with my parents in the same way that I did before this crisis. I miss that. Being able to see certain friends, to travel, we all miss that. But we're seeing something really special in our kids and in most citizens out there, a kindness and a caring for one another. And we can be a much stronger state if we carry that forward.
Terrific. Now we're going to take an audience question. This is from a member of the Clark County Board of Education. And his question is, why can't we have consensus from the governor, the Kentucky Department of Education, and KHSAA on the start of fall athletics? KHSAA really put local boards in a spot by allowing athletics before the governor had recommended in-start school. I understand each county is in a different situation, but not having consensus from our state leaders provides second guessing across communities that COVID is not as bad as some people say it is. We need to be on the same page. And I'd like to add too, is there a scenario where you could just have different districts opening separately dependent on their COVID rates?
So let me start on the first part, in that, you know, we hear two different things out there, and they can't fit. One is local control. We ought to get to decide, and secondly, we need consistency. And I will tell you, Linda, that I've heard some of that from the exact same people. That whether it's talking to their board, saying local control, and what we get are texts or messages back saying, you just need to decide this for everybody. Well, that's not leadership, right? And we need to see people step up and realize in hard times, you got to be the leaders that people hire you to be. I'd like to see some consistency. I'd like it to be based on recommendations about health and safety. But I believe that once people try to start on the athletic side, you're gonna start seeing just how difficult in some sports it can be to stay safe right now. But my hope is that we can develop the procedures to do it as best we can. I do believe that there can be situations after September 28th where there can be, and we're working on it, a system that advises districts mainly about how dangerous it's gotten. Times when they may have gone to in-person classes where just the community spread becomes so significant that there may be a pause that they know they need to take before there's an outbreak in their schools. It's a system we have worked on. Certainly we have seen an example of thinking that way from Greene County that started early and then paused. We're working on getting better data for counties, but let's remember, the virus doesn't care about county lines, and we are a medium to a small state with the second most counties in the entire country. So very small counties mean our teachers are coming from different counties, our vendors are coming from different counties, and we got to look at the entire region around us. My hope is that we can get just about everybody back on September 28th, and then conditions on the ground can tell us when we need to pause. But my real hope is that we are looking at a vaccine or multiple vaccines in the early part of next year as well. So if we are able to get back and we ever have to pause, that again, we can see the light at the end of the tunnel to where we can have a more normal once we get that vaccine.
Okay, and then we're almost out of time. One last question, very quickly. What are you seeing out of colleges? Or are you happy with how that's going in the higher education realm?
We're seeing a lot of cases out of our colleges, and it does create some concern. And part of what we've got to look back on is what can be our expectation of our young adults that age. We can't just say it's on them not to do things that we probably all did in college. We also have to have reasonable expectations for what will and what won't happen. I do think that in many campuses there is robust testing, UK being one example. I think that is a good thing. What we're going to have to see is where's the contact tracing, and ultimately what's the breaking point to taking action. You know, with our university, certainly it can't be how many ICU beds or how many ventilators are being used or are free. I don't think we should make it that be the criteria for our young people. So I'm still waiting to see and to hear at what point the concern becomes great enough. I want to make sure in the meantime we have the testing, and everybody who gets COVID is being taken care of, is being checked in on. If they need that hospital bed, they're getting them. And let's all remember what we don't know. We know a lot about how the virus spreads, but we know very little about its long-term impacts. And we still have some people, even athletes, that months after recovering are still showing fatigue, major symptoms, and then we have this issue of myocarditis. We just got to watch it very carefully. We can't make our decisions based on, well, not that many people in this age group die from this. You know, there's a lot of possible harmful outcomes, short of death, thank goodness, that we need to be concerned about or watching for as we move forward.
All right. Well, thank you. I really want to thank you for taking the time to be with us. We appreciate all your responses, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, Linda, and thanks to the Herald Leader.
Thank you. All right. So on our next panel, we're going to discuss higher education and the ways in which it will be changed by COVID-19. I'm going to introduce our guests. First up is Aaron Thompson, who is the president of the Council on Post-Secondary Education, which governs Kentucky's colleges and universities. Hi, Dr. Thompson. How are you?
Hey, Linda, how are you? Good to see you.
Fine, thanks. Kirsten Turner has been helping design the University of Kentucky's response to the pandemic as the Associate Provost for Academic Affairs. And yesterday, she was promoted to Vice President for Student Success. So congratulations on that.
Thank you, Linda.
And Dr. Kofi Akapo is president of the Bluegrass Community and Technical College, one of the largest schools within Kentucky's community college system. Welcome to you all. Thank you so much for being here. So for the first question, obviously COVID-19 has completely upended higher education, both temporarily, but maybe in more permanent ways as well. And I'd like each of you to respond to what you think the lasting changes of COVID-19 will be. We'll start with Dr. Thompson.
Well, thank you, Linda. Let me first of all just say that we agree with the governor that we have to be very diligent in the way we keep our students safe. And I'm proud to say the campus presidents and myself have been meeting every week to discuss how we do that. We've been meeting with our local health departments. We've been meeting with Dr. Stack and his group. And we are very cognizant of the multiplicity of issues that can take place. We also are a very diverse group of campuses. UK is a lot different than BCTC or any of our other comprehensive campuses with different kinds of resources to do the different things that we need to do to keep people safe. The lasting changes, first of all, I would argue that we talk about innovation and that we have to think about innovation coming out of the COVID, but my argument is we are doing innovation now here within the midst of COVID. We know higher education is going to be an important piece of this conversation to get us to a place where COVID is taken care of. We're developing these vaccines on our campuses throughout the U.S. But we're also the folk that are providing the innovative ways of thinking about connecting long-term employment for our citizens and creating a strong economy. A couple of things that I'll point out. I mean, this clearly has given us a chance to think innovatively about moving from a teaching paradigm to a learner's paradigm. How do we engage, not just in an academic endeavor, but how do we engage people that are coming from different backgrounds geographically, socially, economically, and racially, to be honest with you. And Black Lives Matter has given us an opportunity to really bring that into focus. But we also need to think about what we do to re-engage our adult learners. How do we also create this P20 system that's important? We got 51.7% of our students coming out of high school, graduating from high school, going to college. We're never going to build the economy without doing that. So we've come up with innovative ways during COVID to reach out even to those parents and students to help them to fill out the FAFSA. But more than anything else is that we have to really figure out through this process of how to help our students in the social support, the mental health support, which is actually exacerbated, how we then reach out to about 25% of the population that's inadequate in their digital learning process, whether it's the digital divide or not having the direct learning process to even know how to do it. And that's adult learners as well as traditional age learners. So the argument that we have to pose ourselves now is how do we innovatively create a learning paradigm that makes sense during this time, and how then can we use our efforts to create a longer term system of making sure everybody gets involved. So equity is the issue here. And being able to think about this with that in mind gives us the opportunity to not just wait for innovation, but to be innovative now.
All right. Dr. Turner.
Thank you, Linda. I'd like to underscore a lot of what Dr. Thompson said and thinking about all the different ways in which we're trying to think about ways in which we can be innovative during COVID as well, whether it's creating a better pathway into the institution through economic development, through business, through student support services, or across the spectrum. Our teaching paradigm, thinking about online learning. But one example I'd offer in terms of what we're thinking about is the health and safety of our students. And as we are asking all of our students during this time to take a daily attestation about their symptoms and record it on their phone to us so that we can start to monitor, thinking about ways we could take that technology that survives after COVID. We know that our college students often have issues around mental, physical, or emotional well-being. And so if we could think about them getting into the daily habit of taking a test or taking a quiz or a survey that the institution offers them about their symptoms, about how they're feeling, about how they're doing, and then thinking about interventions that we can provide long-term beyond COVID. So if it's around emotional issues around anxiety, if it's around physical habits and healthy behaviors, that's one example of the way that we're thinking about what we're doing right now as it relates to COVID, but how it could have long-term real benefits in terms of our student and our students' progression and hopefully graduation.
And Dr. Akakpo.
Well, before I answer the question, let me take this time to thank our faculty, staff, and students for how they have responded to this pandemic. They have amazed me, and they continue to amaze me every single day. Having said that, I would say what COVID has done to us is we're now better meeting student needs and helping them balance life, work, and school. At our level for this fall, for example, most of our sessions were online. However, we do have few sessions that are face-to-face. For these face-to-face sessions, most of them are hybrid. And this hybrid session also offers students more flexibilities. Students who don't feel like coming on campus for some reason that we all know, they can log into the classroom and still participate. But for students who, for some other reasons, who cannot make it to the classroom, which we try to make safe, who cannot log in, because we know many students are caring for their younger kids, for their schooling, their parents, and they have some other obligation, our faculty are recording the session for them to listen to at their convenience. Even some of our faculty are going above and beyond to record this session in 30-minute increment. So a student doesn't have to sit down and listen to 50-minute session, 2-hour session, but they can come and take a small bite whenever they can. Outside of the classroom, we have listed a whole host of technological tools that students can use. Some of the platforms that they are already comfortable with. Instead of us making students come on campus during the hours of 8 to 5, if you can make it, that's fine. If a student cannot make it, the student can be helped virtually. But if the student cannot make it virtually during the hours of 8 to 5, we have evening hours. We also have weekend hours. Our goal is, even though COVID-19 is already a challenge, we want to make sure COVID-19 is not a handicap that stands between students and their educational dream.
Terrific. Now, a recent poll here in Kentucky by the Pritchard Committee for Academic Excellence found 77% of Kentuckians said tuition is too high, and a third of the state believes a four-year degree isn't worth the cost. How can higher education respond to those concerns at a time when students are missing out on a lot of higher ed's best strengths, which is interactions with faculty, staff, and other students? I'm going to ask Dr. Turner to go first this time.
Sure, happy to talk to you, Linda, about that. Tuition is a major issue, and thinking about ways in which we can utilize the resources to help families pursue a degree in post-secondary education. It's one of the reasons why at UK we spent a lot of time putting more and more money into financial need, thinking through our UK Leads program of making sure that students who want to come and the doors are always open widest for Kentuckians are able to pursue that education. We also think really clearly and distinctly about how do we, in this environment, make sure that experience is the best experience they can have, knowing that some of the traditional ways in which we have offered that education in the past have to be kind of upended and thought differently. And so that co-curricular experience, that extracurricular experience, even if the students are in their residence halls and their classes are online, how do we provide the right scaffolding? How do we provide the right socially distant experiences in terms of programming? How do we think through things like some of the services that my other panelists have talked about, whether it's teletherapy or mental health in a way that provides that value, even in COVID. So when you think of things like wearing a mask and going in to seeing a counselor or an advisor or a career counselor, in some ways it's better to do that through Zoom or through technology so that people can see their facial expressions and they can communicate in a more intimate way, even though that seems kind of counterproductive when you think about it being online. And so we continue to think about new ways to capture that interaction, that capture that high touch and that way in which having the faculty member, the staff member engage with the students, having the students engage with themselves, but in an environment that allows them to grow and still it makes progress on their degree during this time.
Great. Okay, Dr. Akapko.
You know, for us at the community and technical college level, we already provide the best value at the lowest cost in the state of Kentucky. And second, most of our students are not on campus all the time. Some of them work, have jobs, some of them have other obligations, so they come and go. Therefore, we don't have room and board costs to add to the service that we provide. And thirdly, all the services, additional services that we provide as a result of COVID, the flexibility that we offer, all this is the burden on students. And I will give you one example. Last spring, we literally contacted each and every student once we went online and a week before finals to check in on students, to make sure we maintain that personal touch, even though we cannot meet face-to-face. We just concluded our fall campaign, the first one, just to check on all the 9,300 students who currently are enrolled with us at BCTC to make sure everything is going okay and see if there is any problem that we can address. So our goal is always to make sure we keep that personal touch with students, even though COVID does not allow us to meet face-to-face.
Okay. Dr. Thompson.
Yes, Linda, I'd like to once again go back to your bifurcated question, your double barrel question, which are two, I think, essential questions that we have to answer from a higher ed community in the state. One is about affordability. The other is about the value of higher education. As you all know, at the time of the Pritchard Committee survey, I was out doing a listening tour throughout the state, talking with over 3,000 people, ranging from business and industry to parents and families, P-12 folk, higher ed folk, anybody who would be willing to talk with me. And I, believe it or not, I did more listening than talking, which is kind of hard to believe, but I did. And I found out several things. One is that when we talk about the value of higher education, what I found out that many people just didn't know. So it was my job also to talk about how higher education adds more income, true enough, but how it adds better health. And also talking with our political figures, a lot of the folk who are putting information out on media that talks about is higher education valuable anymore? Well, the idea that if you don't have a higher education certificate or degree that matters, you're not adding to the tax coffers. You have a greater chance of actually being in prison or being on Medicaid. So we've got to come up with a message that matters. That's why, as you all know, my tagline is Kentucky Higher Education Matters. So finding out and giving out information from our public to talk about the value of higher education, we have to do a better job as a community, and not just a higher ed community, but the media, business and industry, everyone. But we also have to connect with our employers on the front end, bringing them into the conversation early and not wait to the end with the hope they buy our product, but they in fact help us to develop our product. That's a conversation unto itself. The affordability is a really interesting question. So I found out there's two ways to operationalize that. One is what I call real issues of affordability. The other is what I call perceived issues of affordability. When I went out in the state, very few people, only about 3%, and these were folks in education too, they didn't know we had free college. Well, we do have free college. We have the 5 high sectors, industry sectors, we offer free tuition in those areas. We are a high aid state, and you need to fill out the FAFSA to kind of know what you're available for. But most of our institutions give a significant amount of institutional aid to help our students get through, like UK as an example here. So a part of it, we had to really point to a direction whereby people can get it. And so we need to be out there branding that. The second one is really real. Tuition, I believe, has gotten to a point to where it's very problematic. And then we advertise on our campus website what it costs to go to college, but we don't normally list the net cost. So we list what I call the sticker price. So we have to be more transparent in that area. But we also have to limit tuition, I think. And as you all know, in the last 2 years, that's what we've done. This year, we limited it to a 0.7%. And please understand the context of this. We've been cut for now over 11 straight years. This past year, thank goodness, we were held harmless, which I'm glad. But we've got to get more money engaged in higher education to make sure that we keep it open and accessible to everybody. But you don't have an opportunity if you don't know you have an opportunity. So we need to be far more transparent, far more engaged in our branding and in our efforts to let people know exactly the value of higher education and how they can be engaged with it.
Thank you so much. We just have a minute left. I'm going to squeeze in an audience question from Kathleen for Dr. Turner. Is there a threshold on the percentage of positive cases that will drive changes of in-person and on-campus numbers? In other words, what is it going to take to change from on-campus to taking everyone online?
Sure. Thank you for that. So we have a group of faculty and medical experts called the START team at UK, led by our Dean, Bob DePaola, that's looking at all of this information and all of this data together to help us make those recommendations. It's not one trigger. It's not one rate. We're looking at available PPE. We're looking at our ability to mount classes and to create the residential experience that we offer. We're looking at what the state, federal, regional, and city governments need and are asking of us. We are looking at the positivity rate, but it's a factor of about 6 or 7 different variables that we continue to monitor to help us make decisions about how to go forward.
Thank you. And I want to thank all of our panelists for a great discussion about higher education, and we appreciate your time. I know you're really busy. Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate you.
All right, next up, we're going to turn to our panel on K-12 education, and here to discuss this momentous time in our state, as we've seen in the past few weeks, is Lou Young, who is the chairwoman of the Kentucky State Board of Education. She's had a front seat to all these issues. Welcome.
Hi.
And then someone else who's been in the hot seat is Julian Tackett, director of the Kentucky High School Athletic Association, who's had to guide his organization through some very tricky weeks. And representing teachers, we have Eddie Campbell, the president of the Kentucky Education Association, which represents more than 40,000 teachers across Kentucky. Thank you all so much for being here. I know you're really busy too. So I'm a parent, and I know one of the biggest concerns I hear out there is that pandemic is causing our children to miss out, whether it's academic achievement or sports or their social growth and mental health. And so when each of you are asked these kinds of questions, what do you say? We're gonna start with Dr. Young.
Oh, thank you, Linda. I have to agree. I really worry about our kids who are missing the chance to be in school. I think that's their natural habitat. I think that's where they want to be. I think that's where we need them to be. So trying to find that balance between our responsibility to educate all of our kids and then our duty of care to ensure that they are safe when they're at school. Having been a superintendent myself, I can tell you there's not a superintendent in Kentucky that doesn't worry every single day about the health and safety of his or her students. So really finding that balance is important. I know that we can help fill in gaps that will result from this time. I think kids have experienced some level of trauma just because their life has been so interrupted since March 13th in Kentucky when we pivoted to remote instruction. So I am really confident in us as people and as a system to help our kids rebound from this. But at the same time, I cannot discount the stress that families are feeling and the worry that they have about their kiddos.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Tackett.
Yes, ma'am. I can tell you that one of the differences, and I realize that athletics is a small piece of the overall educational experiences. One of the big differences, though, is when you lose a season, you cannot get it back. I do believe that on the education side, there's opportunities to recover. I think Dr. Young is exactly right. Unfortunately, it's a little bit of a different situation when you're involved in extracurricular activities, which for some students is the reason they attend every day, the reason they work a little harder in class, the reason they do a lot of other things. So we're watching, there's research out of Wisconsin by Dr. Tim McGuine about what happened to the loss last year of sport in the spring and what sport and activities that really does show it's a telling problem. And we have talked about this the entire time as it's the confluence of two potential health crises, one being the mental physiological side and the other being the virus itself. So it is definitely some tricky skating.
Yes, indeed. And Mr. Campbell, you're a classroom teacher. You talk to parents all the time, I assume.
Yes. I think I agree with both Dr. Young and Commissioner Tackett. Making sure that our students are cared for all the way around. That's what educators do every single day. They want to make sure that they have all the opportunities, not only educationally, but make sure they also have all those other supports that make them successful in life. And I know it's very complex and it's very hard right now, but our students are resilient, our educators are resilient, and I know that educators all across Kentucky aren't going to step back from their students. They're going to move right in. They're going to make sure that they're filling in any kind of gaps that they may be having, making sure that they're reaching out and having conversations and supporting them in any way that they possibly can.
Okay, I'm going to ask you to respond first to the next question as well, which is we're starting the second week of school, and I'm wondering what differences you're seeing or what you're hearing from teachers about NTI as it was delivered in the spring versus what we're seeing now in the fall. I assume it's better.
That's a really good question. So NTI in the spring, that was crisis learning. We had to get it done. Our educators did a phenomenal job on flipping from in-person to making sure that students' education continued throughout the spring. We have the most educated workforce in public education in the state of Kentucky. And our teachers and our educators are experts in teaching and learning. So they did a lot of good work in the spring. But here's the really good thing that they did. They reflected on their practice of what happened in the spring and looking forward into the fall. So our educators have spent all summer looking at new platforms, looking at delivery methods, figuring out how they can deliver high quality instruction, how they can engage with students, and how they can make learning interactive and valuable through a digital medium. And a lot of those did that on their own time. They went out and found PDs. They went out and found professional learning. They researched on their own so that they could make sure that they're delivering a high quality education. And from what I'm seeing from educators all across the state, they have built digital platforms, they've built digital classrooms, they've created lessons that are interactive, that provide opportunities for students to work in groups, to work in full class settings, and all through that digital medium. So I think that's going to be much more robust as we move forward, and educators will continue to reflect on their practice and will continue to grow and make sure that the learning for students is even that more rich, much more rich.
Great. And Dr. Young, what would you say to that?
I would just echo everything that Mr. Campbell said there. I have mad praise for what teachers did from March 13 to May this past year. Necessity indeed is the mother of invention, and they were amazingly nimble on their feet, able to pivot and do heroic work. And I think they're continuing to do that. As Mr. Campbell said, the collaboration among teachers has been phenomenal over the course of this summer as folks have prepared for what they expected would be a remote start in most of our school districts. And then I would only add that I've also seen so many examples of teachers who have collaborated with families to improve the experience of their students, children, and youth since the spring. I think folks are figuring out that we're all on the same team when it comes to educating our children in this crazy, crazy time. And so I love the kind of partnerships that I'm starting to see, as well as, for example, really rich learning based on investigation and inquiry and projects. And the designs that teachers are putting out to share with one another right now are very impressive. I have no doubt that the fall NTI experiences in most places for most kids and families will be much improved over the spring.
Great. Now I'm going to talk to Mr. Tackett about the past few weeks and the huge maelstrom over sports that took me by surprise, but maybe didn't surprise you, about when we start practicing and when we start playing games. How would you sum up the situation, this passion for sports that parents and kids have exhibited in the face of a really deadly virus?
What's interesting, the other day, flipping channels, The Wizard of Oz was on, and I've felt like Dorothy and the Tornado for about the last 4.5 months, but certainly it intensified lately. We know about that passion. That's why we do sports here for the Department of Ed and for the State Board of Ed. We are the best equipped to do that, the best qualified to do that, because we know it. And as some people found out that didn't know, I doubt they expected to get 14,000 phone calls in one day, which is literally what was received at the Department of Ed the day of a particular meeting. And so it is a passion point. We're used to it. We know that it means a lot. And as I say, its value can't be underestimated. It contributes to a whole lot of people getting that diploma in the spring. Because they had to stay eligible for this sport, or they had to stay involved in this sport. It's not an us and them. It's never been an us and them, the academic side and the sports thing. It's a collaborative effort, but it certainly has been it certainly intensified the last few weeks.
Yes. And what do you predict is going to happen? Do you think that we're going to go ahead and start with competition at the end of this month, and it will go as planned?
I think schedule-wise, we'll start as planned. I believe that, which means that they can start playing next week in certain sports and late next week in other sports. I think the nature of the virus will dictate so much. I've been in on so many meetings with both the Department of Public Health and the educators, and I know that it has made cycles. We will probably have teams have to miss couple of weeks practice. They'll have somebody go away, somebody get involved in something outside of sport. They'll have a positive case. They'll have to quarantine anybody they've been around. That's why the protocols are so important that they've been developed. Dr. Capilouto said early on this summer something that we have kind of adopted as a mantra too. We either shut ourselves in for the next year or so, or half a year till everything works out with a vaccine, or we try to navigate this COVID world safely. And we think we've got a pretty good path to navigate that. We think it'll get started, and only the continued adherence of our coaches and our schools will let it continue.
Great. All right. Obviously, all the problems that we've been discussing the past hour are being experienced in much worse ways by low-income children who may not have access to the internet or the resources that can help them bridge all these gaps. What can we do moving forward to close some of these glaring gaps that we have? I'm going to ask Dr. Young to address this first.
I think you're exactly right. And I think we have to call out those inequities, those gaps that exist. And I really appreciate the governor's comments earlier on about the work that he and Lieutenant Governor Jacqueline Coleman and lots and lots of business and industry partners, General Assembly partners, and certainly school and district and community partners around Kentucky to go that last mile to provide internet connectivity across our state in rural as well as urban technology deserts. That's extremely important. It used to be that having a TI-80 something calculator was a necessity for school, and used to be that having a laptop or a web-enabled device was a nice to have. That's no longer the case. That's where the inequity lies in terms of our students' ability to access learning and to be successful at this time. So the push toward Wi-Fi and device deployment across this state is critical to support all of our students, not just those students whose families have traditionally provided those kinds of devices. In addition to that, I think that these connections to family and home are critically important, and something that I think Mr. Campbell could attest to, that teachers have done an amazing job of figuring out ways to really connect with and check in on their children in a remote setting. So thinking about those kiddos that we like to check on, just have eyes on every single day, learning how to do that, spend time not just on the schoolwork that day, but on really checking in about the health, the wellness, and the safety of our kids from all across Kentucky, I think are really important, and knowing that we have to take care of them emotionally as well as academically in the work that we're doing moving forward.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Mr. Campbell.
Yes, I do want to agree with Dr. Young that our educators have been reaching out to their students and checking on them to make sure that they have all their needs being met, not only their academic needs, but their mental health needs. And our educators did a phenomenal job, preparing meals and delivering meals to make sure that students had a healthy and nutritious meal all last spring and even continuing into this fall. In terms of the gaps that we're seeing, I do want to point out these gaps have always been there. These gaps didn't just appear because COVID showed up. These gaps in terms of technology and access and opportunity have been there all along. They've just been shown, the light has been shown on them through those. So making sure that we're really making that hard investment into public education to make sure that the resources for students are available so that they have access. I do agree with Dr. Young that the work that the governor and the lieutenant governor are doing to make sure that we have partnerships that are being formed with outside companies to make sure that students have access to broadband internet so that they can have connectivity, so they have access, so they have computers and digital devices so that they can access their classes online. But we also need to make sure that we're investing in our public schools for mental health counselors that are in the schools, that we have nurses, full-time nurses in all of our facilities, and making sure that we are meeting all those other needs of students so that they have a robust educational experience so that they can be successful as they move forward in life.
Great. And Mr. Tackett, I'm sure you see this in sports as well.
And one of the things that was most concerning to us in the early summer when we started back with our opportunity for our coaches and kids to be together was that many times our coaches know more about a family situation than some of the family members do. They know when there's potential problems at home. It's a very tight bond between a coach and an athlete. I always say that 40 some years after school, There's some teachers, I might not remember everything they taught and everything they said, but I could just about quote you everything a coach ever said. And those relationships are so valuable. The other thing, though, Linda, that some people don't think about is we don't have statewide equal access even to get to facilities. When you talk about the time where people could go work out at a private gym, well, that's really good if you can pay for a private gym or if your school has access, but that may not be the same for everybody. And our urban populations really have some challenges with that. So the key is not, and everyone has said it, I would just repeat it, it's much like the virus. We don't just say it's gone away because we say it's gone away. We don't just say that these problems are gone because we say they're not there. The key is to recognize them and work towards solutions.
That's great. We have 2 questions left, and we're not very much time, so I'm going to ask for really short questions. We have an audience question from Jared. What permanent changes to education might emerge from this crisis? Mr. Tackett, we'll go back around.
Well, I think that obviously there will be, just from our standpoint, where we're dealing with student eligibility and things like that, we've got to modernize some of our longstanding permanent rules that take into account distance learning. We had really not done a lot about that. We were all used to the fact you went to school, you went to class, you took care of sports afterwards, et cetera. Well, we've got to be flexible and nimble, and it's going to give us a chance to modernize some things.
Mr. Campbell.
So glad you asked this question. I think the opportunities are endless for rethinking what public education looks like, how we interact with students, how we shift from a standardized based testing system that's kind of a testing punish system to a performance based that's focused on the students and really individualizes the students' needs and their individual education.
Great. And Dr. Young.
Yeah, so great answers, you guys. I agree. I think that there are some genies that are out of the bottle that I hope we never put back in. I hope this opportunity to rethink being physically present, if you're not able to, why would we need that anymore when we have learned how to work in this kind of virtual split screen world of in-person and remote? So thinking differently about how we think about time and space as we move forward, a real emphasis on things that really matter. Certainly less of an emphasis on standardized tests and high stakes accountability in favor of what Dr. Thompson mentioned earlier, which is the new focus on learning, not on teaching. And so emerging from this with a focus on deeper, more personalized learning for all kids would be a well-earned silver lining to COVID-19.
Okay, and then last question, I won't hold you to it, but this is what parents want to know. Do you think we will get back to in-person school this semester? Dr. Young.
Yes, I am cautiously but eternally optimistic that we will get through this peak of cases, find ourselves on the downslope, much like Germany, and then find ourselves being able to carefully enter back in at a slow pace, soft launch, but I think we can do it.
Great. Mr. Campbell.
I agree with Dr. Young. I think, when we look at the numbers, the positivity rate is moving down. We're moving in the right direction. And if we can safely get our students back into the classroom, I know that there's not an educator across the state that doesn't want to have their students back in the classroom with them so that they can work with them on a more individual basis. So I think we will get there, but we need to make sure that it is done safely and very methodically.
Great. And Mr. Tackett.
Well, the only thing I would add is I think our educators proved last March when in 48 hours, most of them switched the total way they instruct, that they can adapt, and they will adapt as quick as we can. And it looks safe. They'll be back in the classroom and we'll have a little more normalcy in society.
Wonderful, wonderful way to end a big upswing. I want to thank you all for being here and providing us with all this great insight. We really do appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I want to thank all the participants, in fact, for taking time to share their views. If you want to read more about these kinds of issues, you can find them at Kentucky.com or in your Lexington Herald Leader. And thank you all again. Take care and stay safe.